Hello and welcome to the Low Carbon Conversation series, where we bring together leading thinkers and influencers in the commercial property sector to discuss the challenges in achieving a low carbon future. I'm Rohan McCarthy, a Senior Design Manager. I'm here with Grant Spencer, an Associate, and Simon Bone, an Associate Principal from Perkins&Will. Thank you for joining the conversation.
Thank you for inviting us. Thanks, Rohan.
Today we'll be talking about designing for deconstruction and the role that it plays in working towards a low carbon future. So to begin with, if we can just touch on what is designing for deconstruction and what are the techniques, some of the techniques that we're employing currently within our sector.
So design for deconstruction, we very much see that embedded within the circular design approach. So it's got various aspects, and in order of scale of importance in terms of the carbon impact, it starts out with reuse, then works into repurpose, and then eventually recycle.
The new 3 Rs.
Absolutely, yeah. So the reuse really is taking an existing material, product or system and reusing it on site or in another building, but in exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. Whereas repurpose takes that product or system, material, and uses it in a new way. So transitions its use to potentially a new function completely. Mm-hmm. And then lastly is the reuse, the recycle, where that product goes away and gets reprocessed into a new material. So obviously going in a cycle between the three, less carbon in the reuse, mm-hmm. More carbon in the recycle. I think the last one, the recycle, it is there. It's obviously much better than going to landfill and the waste side of things. But yeah, opportunities to recycle is very much dependent on the materiality. So we're starting to look at the materials in a much greater depth, mm-hmm. and trying to simplify the materials. So we're not looking for kind of composite materials that are bonded together, which makes them very hard to recycle. Mm-hmm. So we're looking for kind of single material uses and things that do not have to be kind of demolished and then can go better into that recycling pool.
Yeah, and I think that plays in both with the material as a whole, but then also the product as a full delivery. So you touched on sort of the glues and adhesive side of things, and one thing that I'm really trying to push and promote at the moment is the use of dry jointing and mechanical fixings and moving away from that glues and adhesives. Obviously, there's great benefits to that, but just thinking about what that future purpose could be and the limitation that glues do provide there of trying to then separate those elements, whether it be because they're going to be recycled or they are going to be repurposed. Having something that is more a mechanical fixing or a dowel joint or something like that can be then much easily then disassembled in that future aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. We're looking at these kind of almost traditional construction techniques where they're coming together and rejuvenating those as such. But there is a challenge there. I mean, we're trying to move away from glues, but there are some benefits in terms of their performance, their longevity. So actually, we have to do this quite carefully because mm-hmm. we don't want to lose those kind of performance aspects that we're getting. So we're looking now at where we have to use those glues. Can they be less impactful in terms of their environmental or sustainability credentials? And then, hopefully we can move beyond them in the future.
Shall we touch on some deconstruction techniques?
I think it's three sort of key aspects to it, really. We start off with the design, which instigates the kind of principles for design for disassembly and then circular design. And then we pass that over to yourselves as a contractor, mm-hmm. And the subcontractor and trades to continue that process, and then moving on to the client or owner of the project, which is going to have to then manage and operate it. There's a number of things that we do within the design aspect. I mean, maybe Grant, if you want to talk about some.
I'll work with the whole entire design team, and I see like their goals, whether those goals are based on obviously keeping that building as it is, or what we can make use of the building. The goals of there's certain elements that we'll follow, so that's the well and the BREEAM, and about getting certain things into that building. So we're following all of that, and then as a team starts to develop, I will be I don't know, I would maybe keep an eye on what these designs are doing. I'm thinking long term through to dealing with the construction team as well, and obviously being able to explain it all to the clients, and how we can all make it work with this guide of either taking it apart or reusing it, sort of come the end of the lease period.
And for us as a contractor, it obviously depends where we come into the design as well, whether we're partnered with you at sort of a stage 2, stage 3, we can help embed some of that knowledge as well, or whether we are just coming in sort of post stage 4 or even stage 5 design. But then how we then create that same sort of knowledge base and continue that on through with the trades, through the CDP elements, as well through our design workshops. It's often a fast-paced fit-out, so we're pushed for time, but how we can really sort of embed those principles and really draw the best out of them as well. The trades have their own ideas on how they do things. They know their systems and what they do on a day-to-day basis better than anybody. So we really want to tap into that knowledge as best we can.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I would try to do anyway. I'll tap into the joineries and the petition suppliers, and maybe whoever else, the furniture suppliers. We'll go to them at one point, but then we will also follow that up. I'd love to get you on board earlier to get that better advice, because there's a cost implication of some of the way we might want to do things, and that's always a challenge, whichever project it is. So bringing people on board earlier and better is great for us, as well as I think as well as the cost guys, because they start to see things quicker as well, and they're very sharp. So
always the challenge.
And I think I think you're absolutely right about this early engagement and training. I think as a general contractor, there's real possibility. We should be designing systems that are modular, flexible, using the right sort of materials to allow that reuse in the future. But we also need to be looking at things like specifications and actually calling out very early on what we're looking for in terms of deconstruction or disassembly. And then really we're handing over that challenge to yourselves. And as you say, I think you've got a real possibility to kind of start with the education of the trades, lead by example, maybe push that in. Some of these are smaller operators, so you've got the strength to actually bring that knowledge and expertise in, focus them on this agenda, and then obviously manage that going through. I think in our specifications, we might not describe all the connections and details on a project. There's quite often a contractor choice in there for that. So I think making sure that that's promoted and understood by the trades going through. And then I think there's also a bit to record and document. So monitor those materials coming in, making sure the separation is maintained, and then recording what it is so we can hand over documentation to the owner, who then has the responsibility of managing it through the life cycle. Yeah,
certainly on recent projects that I've been involved with, material selection has become such a really massive component, and that upfront documentation and verification of every single aspect and certification that they have sitting behind their products has become really key. And we sort of have jokes on site about sort of the border force that is those people that review that, just to make sure we are ticking all the right boxes, and that we can promote other elements that we weren't necessarily expecting. If we think that there is a product on the market that is better, it may be same price point but has better sustainability credentials for X, Y, and Z, that we put that forward as an alternative. You don't just get the cost benefit out of it, but it's also, what's the sustainable story around that as well. One other aspect I just wanted to talk about, we sort of talked about sort of design and the trades, is obviously then the other big party involved with the project, which is the client, obviously. So is it still an education piece for them, or are they more on board with it than we potentially anticipate?
I think there is definitely an education piece going on. The clients that are probably more invested in sustainability maybe are further down that road. But I think as an industry as a whole, we're all learning. So being able to transfer that education or support the client in that understanding, how these circularity or design deconstruction can align with their ESG values and their sustainability targets. There's very little metrics out there about why you should do something. Clients are typically focused on maybe the kind of the first cost, or have been previously. So we're now shifting to this life cycle cost. So understanding how that can impact, in terms of the project and change that focus is really important. I think there's also a responsibility aspect now coming. If we deal with these projects as a material bank that is going to have this long life cycle, then they're going to be the custodians of that, and they're going to have to manage that and make sure further projects are actually managed in the correct way, and they continue to keep update and control and monitor all the materials in the building. So quite a challenge and a change and a shift for those facilities teams.
Yeah. I think it's that big education piece of giving them that knowledge, but also then kind of empowering them to then take it and run with it as well. Ultimately they're going to be the custodians of that piece throughout the project lifecycle. We're involved just at the very beginning and through that design and construction phase, but then they're potentially in a space for 20 years plus.
Yeah, I think that's partly where some of the BIM is coming through as well. So as well as helping us at the beginning of a project, at the end of a project when we hand over, rather than the old-fashioned just an O&M pack, as it were, multiple files, there's a complete BIM package which
folder that just sits and gains dust on,
exactly.
on a shelf for 20 years.
But it can sit inside a PC now, or in the cloud, as it were. But it's always there for them, that knowledge that they can gain from clicking a few buttons and finding where something is, where it's come from, what its credentials are, what its credentials need to be to go back in. It's not just a case of we need another spare part. They can look at the whole history of it at the touch of a button. So it's quite straightforward in that respect. But again, they have to they buy into that, and they are buying into that.
One of the other questions around sort of the client engagement piece is sort of their carbon footprint and their understanding of their carbon footprint. Is that something that they're coming to you more as a question of wanting to embed that early, or is it again something that you're sort of pushing back to them of giving them that understanding more so?
I think most organisations now have a carbon target or a net zero target in terms of their operation. Historically, they may have been delivering that through purchasing or offsetting, but the possibility to have real impact through the project is growing. Again, I think going back to that point around how we measure carbon is one of the key aspects. There's been a lot of work done recently about operational carbon. And I think, we've seen some real benefits in terms of the energy performance of buildings and real estate. But now I think the shift really needs to go to embedded carbon as such. And you're starting to see that begin to appear through various kind of accreditation systems. Something like Neighbours is starting to look at that and embed it into the system. So with that, it's understanding how we can measure the project and then relay to the client the optioneering around carbon, because there is very much against the kind of first day one cost versus the life cycle. So there's a few questions and conversations to be had around how to best deliver that carbon. But yeah, the more tools and solutions to measure that would actually help that conversation.
An emerging piece is actually now in awards, I'm finding. The likes of ESG awards, the BCO just had their first ESG award that they announced this year. But I think that potentially can have an influence and play back to clients as well in terms of them attracting talent. What can clients present as something that puts them head and shoulders above their competition? And
I think there's going to have to be two aspects to this. There's going to be incentives and there's going to be penalties, really. So the idea of the different systems over time bringing in carbon caps in terms of what you deliver, and they could start quite high level and decrease. They need to be kind of regional, building specific so they're achievable.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want them sort of come into play too quickly, so we want the industry to move with it. So if you like, they're the penalties, but then incentives are very much like you say, getting the awards, the certifications, maybe tax benefits by reducing carbon. Those would also be beneficial, so we get this two-pronged approach, really, which, I think would really help accelerate circular design and design for disassembly.
No one wants to talk about COVID anymore, but I think that was a real showstopper and forced a lot of businesses to adapt very quickly to the whole flexible working piece. And we've obviously seen a draw back to the office now, but there is now an accepted dynamic of between the two. Obviously, different companies are at different levels, but again, just how that plays into the building itself and creating a space that is incentivizing people to come in as opposed to staying at home. So just how, again, the sustainability piece plays into what is the incentive for someone to come into the office.
I think from the COVID point of view, obviously the businesses are re-establishing people coming in. Is it a 2-day week in the office? Is it 3-day in the office? Is it full-time in the office? That's one of the things that they're looking at. It's like, well, what are we designing for? How many people are we designing for? And to some degree, it's an unknown.
Mm-hmm.
They know what they want people to do, but they also know that not everyone's coming every day.
I think the other thing that's really important coming out of or moving into the hybrid work world is the attraction and retention of staff. So yes, delivering them the kind of workspaces that are going to attract them. It's going to suit how they want to work. Understanding that's an evolving piece and that the spaces evolve with it. But if we can bring these kind of values of deconstruction, circular design, sustainability into the workspace, then I think we're giving authenticity to the space. Obviously, the attraction is being shown that people are going to organisations that can showcase that care and attention to sustainability, and being able to have a workplace that reflects those values is key to keeping that overall continuity between that message. And I think it's something that people will really start to question as they go and look at the better performing organisations. Do they walk the talk and live the dream, so to speak? So I think it's really important from that aspect, and that's been shown to have a massive impact on organisations. That can come at a slight premium. So being able to show or offset that premium against the overall life of the product is hugely beneficial to kind of sell that solution to clients. I think the other aspect of it is around the aesthetics of these systems. So, creating these great spaces that people come to work in, the design for disassembly, exposing fixings, etc., is shifting the dial in terms of how we approach the look and feel. It's not to say we can't deliver traditional appearances, but again, perhaps there's some honesty in actually kind of showcasing that approach. Again, I think that really helps in terms of communicating what the project's all about, and in terms of how it was built and how it aligns to those systems and those approaches, and again communicates these strategies back to the people that visit the building, occupy the building on a daily basis.
Yeah, there's an honesty in it.
Yes, absolutely.
No visible fixings is going to be a thing of the past.
It's subjective.
Yeah, I think potentially. It's an education thing, and I think this is where, as designers, I get really interested, because this is about the creativity and the sort of the innovation. How can we kind of explore this and investigate that with the clients? Some of them may want to embrace that kind of authenticity. Others may still be looking for something a little bit more traditional. But how can we do that in the same way? And those are the challenges that I think designers thrive on.
Yeah. One final question for you both before we bring to a close. What do you see as the biggest thing that we could change in our industry today, in our mission towards a net zero future?
For me personally, I think it's bringing in embodied energy assessment into the projects. So providing a way to actually kind of report and account on the embodied energy, as I say earlier. There's a lot of work being done around operational, but embodied is now taking up a large portion of the carbon footprint of our projects, and being able to kind of report on that and make that accountable is going to be one of the key things. And say that's why we're starting to see it into things like neighbours, but the government systems, the accreditation systems, finding ways to capture that and report on it will be key.
Mm-hmm. I think with that, it's like someone said, is that honesty. It's at the beginning of the project. We're focused on it, but what is reported at the end of that project, this is what we aimed for. This is where we got to, but how much has been lost along the way through various changes in the project, and if we can be honest about it at the end, I think that would be a real move forward. But it's a difficult one, but I think it can happen.
Yeah, I think that sort of transparency is going to be key to the learning, because we'll start to see where typically as a community we're failing or we can do better, and then that allows people to kind of focus and create kind of innovations and new markets, kind of assist and address those holes. So again, that opportunity for benefit for all by moving through that.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for coming in today and joining the conversation. I think it's been a really insightful session. Thank you for listening to our conversation today. If we've piqued your interest, then please have a look at our YouTube channel where you can see all of our other low carbon conversations, and be sure to hit the subscribe button to see when our next episode lands. Thank you.